Snow White was a beautiful princess who lived in a beautiful castle. Unfortunately, she also lived with her evil stepmother, Queen Narissa. She made poor Snow White to clean the entire castle, until one day a handsome prince saw Snow White and the two began to fall in love. Queen Larissa saw the intimacy between the two and she was pissed. She ordered the huntswoman to kill Snow White, but she refuses and warned Snow White about her stepmother. Realizing that her own stepmother was trying to kill her, Snow White runs away and never returned. The huntswoman slaughtered a pig and took its heart out. She gave the heart to the evil queen, and she was delighted. Meanwhile, Snow White managed to find a cottage that is not expensive and fancy, but it is a lot cozier and safe from her evil stepmother. So, she went inside and cooks up a meal for herself. She hasn't been eating food for years, since her stepmother forced her to go on a strict diet. After finish eating the food, she heads upstairs and falls asleep on the bed. Little did she know that this cottage was owned by the Seven Dwarves. They worked at the diamond mine to pick up some diamonds, and after all that, they head back home. When they got back home, they noticed that someone is inside of their house. So they grabbed their weapons and went inside quietly. They smelled the food that was cooked by the intruder. Then they rushed upstairs and found Snow White lying on their bed. She wakes up due to the noise that the dwarfs are making. When she saw them, she introduced herself and explained her reason why she was in their home. After telling the whole story, the dwarfs decided that she can stay in the cottage as long as she wants. Overjoyed by their act of kindness, Snow White gets up from the bed and was about to make some dinner for them. But suddenly, she passes out on the floor and the dwarfs helped her up. One of the dwarfs is actually a doctor and he examined Snow White. He noticed that Snow White's tummy is bigger. At first, he thought that it was the food that she ate, but then her tummy started to move. It has come to the realization that Snow White is pregnant. The dwarfs decided to protect Snow White and her baby from the evil queen. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Queen Larissa asked the magic mirror who is the fairest of the land. The mirror said that it was Snow White. But Queen Larissa told the mirror that Snow White was dead. And to prove it, Queen Larissa showed him the heart that she assumed that it belongs to Snow White. But the mirror confirms that Snow White is alive. And the heart that the queen was carrying was a pig's heart. Furious, the evil queen slit the huntswoman's throat for betraying her, and did not do what she was told to do. So Queen Larissa decided that she was going to kill Snow White by herself. The next day, Snow White was preparing food for the dwarfs when suddenly there was a knock at the door. Snow White opens it and saw an old woman offering Snow White an apple to eat. Snow White refuses to take the apple, but when she thought about her baby's health, she accepted the apple that is offered by the old woman. She bites the apple, and for some reason, she started coughing and choking up until she passes out on the floor. Then, she started to bleed on the side of her stomach, and the old woman laughs an evil laugh and left the cottage. One of the dwarfs came back home and noticed that Snow White was bleeding on the floor. He calls one of his brothers to help and they all came back home in a hurry. They were all concerned about her and her baby. But suddenly, Snow White's stomach started to move. They realized that the baby is coming, so they decide to give Snow White a C-section by opening her stomach. One of the dwarfs, however, is a doctor and noticed the apple that Snow White was eating. He picks up the apple and noticed that it was filled with poison. He creates an antidote for both Snow White and her baby. The dwarfs manage to cut open her belly, and out comes a beautiful baby girl. The dwarfs decided to split up into 3 groups. One group heads to the bathroom to give the child a bath, while the others clean up the mess and sew Snow White's stomach back together. Then, one of the dwarfs head outside to pick some flowers. The doctor managed to create an antidote and give Snow White a shot first. He told everyone that Snow White was poisoned by the evil queen, and they were furious. However, the baby started to cry because she was afraid of needles. The dwarfs does not want her to be sad or scared, and they tried their best to cheer her up. Then one of the dwarfs came back inside the cottage because he hears the baby crying. But the baby stopped crying when she saw a single rose that the dwarf was holding. She picks it up, smells it, and she loves it. While she was distracted, the doctor managed to inject the antidote on the baby, and she didn't cry. The dwarfs are happy that she is okay, and they decided to name her Rose Red. The baby girl loves the name, Rose Red. However, they turned their attention to Snow White. She was not moving. So the doctor kneels down and checks her pulse. And to his disappointment, she has none. The doctor wondered if it has something to do with the poison or the amount of blood lost. So he creates an antidote one last time and injects the antidote on the poison apple. Thankfully, the antidote removes the poison from the apple, which means that Snow White and Rose Red are safe from the poison. Unfortunately, Snow White has died due to the amount of blood lost when she fell. The dwarfs are sad about this news, but they were also furious at the evil queen. But the doctor assures them that karma will punish the evil queen for what she almost done. But for now, they must honor and pay their respects to their fair princess. The next day, a funeral was prepared for Snow White. The dwarfs managed to bring flowers, and they paid tribute to their lovely princess. Then the prince arrived to the cottage and discovered that Snow White is dead. He is heartbroken and kisses Snow White in her forehead. Before he leaves, he also discovered a baby girl, and he soon realized that he was the father. But unfortunately, he could not take care of her, because he doesn't know how. So he asked the dwarfs to take good care of her until her 16th birthday. They all agree, and the prince went back home. Back at the castle, the evil queen was rejoicing her victory. She asked the magic mirror one last time, "Who is the fairest in the land?" The mirror answered, "Although Snow White was dead, there's another woman who is fairer than you. Her name is Rose Red." Queen Larissa was furious. She did not understand why she is not the fairest in the land. The mirror explained the reason was that the queen was cruel, vain, and unkind, while Snow White was loving, caring, and kind to others, which is why she is the fairest in the land. The mirror also added that Snow White didn't die from the poison apple, but she died due to the blood lost when she fell. Lastly, the mirror informed Queen Larissa that the daughter of Snow White was Rose Red. This made the queen gone completely mad, that she jumps out the window and was never found. 16 years later, Rose Red has grown up to become a beautiful woman, just like her mother. She thanks the dwarfs for taking care of her, and she kisses each of them in the forehead. Her father arrives, and she heads home. Despite the tragedy, they all lived happily ever after.